talk. Here we go. He said he living life as a gringo, where you question where you fit in every time you mingle. They say you do this with not enough that. My rapping is really bad. This life as a gringo.
Yes, hello and welcome to another episode of Life as a Gringo. I am Dramos, of course. And man, it is a special time because it's officially Latin Heritage Month. We kicked off on Friday the 15th, or Latino Heritage Month, however you want to say it, but we are in the midst of it. It's our month. Be proud, be loud, be out there. Talk that talk. This is our month, and I'm really excited. I'm speaking on a couple, I think, different panels coming up in just a few weeks in the beginning of October. Just so much going on. I feel like I'm coming into this episode real high. I got a lot of energy right now. Just had a nice cup of Puerto Rican coffee. Okay, so special shout out to 787 Coffee, who's just amazing coffee. I'm not even sponsored by them. I just love them. But we are in the midst of Latin Heritage Month. I am hyped for it, especially hyped to bring you this episode today. Latin history that you did not know. And man, also, before I even get into what we're talking about on today's show, very special thanks to Amazon Music for supporting the podcast. We are actually featured on their Society and Culture page for Latin Heritage Month. So big shout out to them for supporting the show. So don't forget that you can listen to this show, Life as a Gringo, of course, on Amazon Music, in addition to wherever else you get podcasts. But big shout out to Amazon Music for supporting this podcast. They've been really, man, just supportive of this podcast, my other podcast, The Street Stoic, since day one. So big shout out to Amazon Music. Definitely go listen to our podcast on there if you're able to. And man, so today's show, we are going to be talking Latin history that you didn't know. I wanted to bring on a few different people on today's show who are just content creators who are constantly giving, really valuable information and history lessons from our community, lost history, things you didn't know. So on today's show, helping me bring you some of this Latin history that you didn't know, we're going to have Matthew Torres, the story time guy. He's going to be bringing you something in the world of entertainment, right? As he kind of always does, the world of comic books, movies, and all those things. And going to put us on to the inspiration for Batman, which I had no idea has a Latin origin. So we will have him on talking about that. We're also going to have myself talking about Pedro Albizu Campos, who is a Puerto Rican hero and somebody who's fighting for the independence of Puerto Rico, and also exposing a lot of the atrocities that the U.S. government committed on the people of Puerto Rico. So we are going to be talking about him today. I'll be filling in on that one. And then closing things out, man, we've been talking a lot about aliens and having some fun with that on the show. So we are going to have Antonio Milian hopping on and sharing a really interesting kind of story that happened in Latin America involving some alleged aliens. So we'll have a little bit of fun. We'll get into some serious stuff. But first and foremost, I thought it'd be cool to kind of kick things off talking about some people that you may or may not have known are Latin, have Latin origin. I always get excited when I hear some of my favorite artists or creatives have some sort of Latin in them. So we're going to start things off there. We're going to dive into that. And actually, before we get into that, just a friendly reminder, we just opened up our new offer for the Just Be Social Club, one-on-one coaching and our group mastermind. You'll have access to both of those. It's a 3-month program. The group mastermind is for life, and it's all about the 4 pillars of conscious living that I've been talking about over the last month or so. So justbe.nyc is the website. Click the social club tab and you can click apply now. We only have 4 spots available. We're closing it down on Friday, September 29th. So you have until now and then to fill that application out and schedule a free one-on-one consultation with myself and my business partner, Brenda. And we'll see if you're a good fit for it. But if you're feeling like something is missing in your life, you're lacking fulfillment, you want some mentorship, you want some community, this is what we're doing it for. So, push past the fear or uncomfortableness of trying something new and understand that everything you're dreaming about, the life that you want for yourself, is on the other side of that fear. So take this first step. Again, it is free to do the consultation. Literally just fill out a couple questions on our website and you can book the one-on-one right then and there. And we'll sit down and chat and see if it's a good fit for you and what you're trying to do. But I'm so excited to bring this to life. This is I feel like my life's work right here. Just trying to give back to our community and help people improve their lives. So if that's what you're looking for, justbe.nyc, click the social club tab and you'll see an apply now button on there. And I'd love to meet you and see if you'd be a good fit. Again, 4 spots only. It closes on Friday, September 29th. Do it before then so you have time to schedule the one-on-one. But yeah, speak now or forever hold your peace kind of stuff. All right, well, with that said, now let's get into our For the People in the Back segment.
Say it louder for the people in the back. Say it louder for the people in the back.
All right, so first and foremost, before I even get to this list, it's on Stars Insider. I want to acknowledge that Jean-Michel Basquiat, the artist, somebody who has been a huge inspiration for me. I want to acknowledge the fact he's actually half Puerto Rican. He's Puerto Rican and Haitian. I had no idea when I first started getting into his artwork. It's something that I feel like doesn't get spoken about enough. I feel like, and yeah, he's Puerto Rican, so you can add a little check mark into our section here for the Latinos, winning with some Jean-Michel Basquiat, one of the greatest artists of all time. Now let's get to this list, right? I'm gonna go through some of them quicker because some of them are pretty obvious. Like Jessica Alba, she is what is she? She is Mexican. She has Mexican. She's her grandparents were Mexican immigrants, right? I feel like a lot of us knew about her sort of Latin origins. She's been talking about that a lot more recently. I feel like Bruno Mars, we've heard about that. He has some Puerto Rican in him. Uma Thurman, I had no idea, but her mom is actually Mexican. So look at that. Demi Lovato, knew this one. She is Mexican. Let's see. Alexis Bledel, who was in that show, not Gossip Girls. What the hell is the other show? Same era of television from the 2000s. What the hell is that show called? She was in the show Gilmore Girls. That's what I was trying to think of. She's actually Argentinian and Spanish was her first language. I had no idea. You would have never known looking at her. Bella Thorne is Cuban. You have Camila Bell, who is Brazilian. Let's see. Oscar Isaac, who we kind of knew. He's Guatemalan and Cuban. Aubrey Plaza is part Puerto Rican. This one was very surprising to me, by the way. I just want to throw this one out there. Not Aubrey Plaza. She's been talking about that a lot recently. Snooki from the Jersey Shore is actually Chilean and was adopted by an Italian family. This is one that kind of blew my mind, right? Because it's all about, Italian content with the Jersey Shore, and she's actually Chilean. So that's pretty interesting. I don't know if that's a win or a loss for us Latinos, but here we are. Howie from the Backstreet Boys is actually Puerto Rican. I believe his mother's Puerto Rican. Who else we got here? Taboo from the Black Eyed Peas is the son of Mexican parents. Tayo Cruz, Brazilian mother. Sarah Paxton, who I am shocked by this, but is apparently part Mexican. Her mother is Mexican. Joanne Garcia, Cuban. I mean, with last name like Garcia, you would think. But Stacey Dash, who has a bit of a troubled, last few years, I guess. She is the daughter of a Mexican-American mother. Nicole Richie apparently has some Mexican heritage. I didn't know she was actually adopted by Lionel Richie. This one blew my fucking mind, by the way. But Hulk Hogan, the wrestler, is actually has some Panamanian in him, allegedly, right? Hulk Hogan, the wrestler, has Panamanian in him. This one was a shock to me. Alexis Vega is Colombian by her father. This one shocked me as well because it's one of my favorite artists ever. Kid Cudi actually has a father of Mexican heritage. So Kid Cudi, big fan of his. Kat Von D, I already knew this one. She's actually born in Mexico. Her parents, I believe, are from Argentina, I believe they said. And this one right here just brings joy to my life. And it further proves that I just think the two of us are in fact soulmates. Megan Good. She actually is part Puerto Rican from her grandmother's side. So, I feel like it's just the universe is speaking to us. I know she listens to the show. Big fan of the show. Shout out to Megan. I know you're single now. Give me a call. Let's see what's going on. Vanna White. Her father is from Ponce, Puerto Rico, which I would have never thought. Let's see. Jordana Brewster from Fast and the Furious. She was born in Panama City to a Brazilian mother. Cameron Diaz, I think we knew this, but her family, I think her dad comes from Cuba. Frankie Muniz, Puerto Rican descent. His dad's Puerto Rican. Oscar de la Renta, who is the designer, actually born in the Dominican Republic. And I think he's part Puerto Rican as well on his dad's side, it says. Sammy Davis Jr., I didn't know this one. His mother is of Cuban descent. Khalees, the singer Khalees, is part Puerto Rican. David Blaine, the magician, is actually part Puerto Rican as well. Swizz Beatz, the producer, part Puerto Rican. Let's see what else got. Fabulous, the rapper, also he's half Dominican. Didn't know that before. Eva Leroux, I'm not really sure who that is, but she has some Puerto Rican in her apparently. Lana Parrilla is the daughter of a Puerto Rican baseball player. Reggie Jackson, the Yankees great, is half Puerto Rican. Yo, Puerto Ricans, listen, I know it's Latin Heritage Month, but you already know I'm a very proud Puerto Rican, and I can't help but make us into a competition, and we getting a lot of them check marks on our column. I just want to throw that out there. Like, no shade to anybody else, but, we out here representing. Let's see. Ryan Guzman, who is from Texas, born to a Mexican father. Dave Navarro, who is the guitarist of Jane's Addiction, also hosts that tattoo show. I can't remember what the hell it's called. Is it Master of Ink or something like that? He is of Mexican parents, Mexican descent. David Archuleta, the former American Idol. He is from, Honduras, I think his family is from. Trina, okay. Half Dominican, apparently. I'm going to skip through a few of these over here because some of them are getting obscure. Victoria Justice is Puerto Rican, actually. Mom is Puerto Rican. Let's see who else I recognize on here. They're giving me a lot of damn names. I didn't realize how long this damn list was. Linda Perry. Okay. I didn't realize Linda Perry was Brazilian. Okay. Let's see. I think that's it. That's the entire list. I hope this was informative for you. Listen, this isn't going to be life-changing for everybody. I just think it's really interesting when you find out, some people share a certain lineage. I think it's also interesting that a lot of these people, particularly of a certain generation, have never spoke about their Latinness or acknowledged it, right? Particularly when you look in the side of even hip-hop and rap, like somebody like Fabulous or Swizz Beatz, both iconic in the world of hip-hop, and we never hear them acknowledge the Latin side of themselves, or Kid Cudi. And I think it kind of speaks to the idea of sort of Latinness from that generation not being this cool thing, and how that might have taken away your credibility in the world of something like hip hop. So I think it's a really, just interesting kind of conversation that this is kind of how much things have changed, I guess I should say, right? Because now it's everybody wants to celebrate it. Something like Cameron Diaz or something like that, or all these people, you never really heard them talking about it before. So I think it's an interesting kind of change of times that we're in right now. All right, so that was a little kind of, some fun we're having with it. We're going to go in and out of some serious stuff, some fun. So with that said, let's turn it over to some of the guests I have on today's show, sharing some interesting Latin history that they wanted to share. I kind of left it up to them. Storytime guy Matthew Torres and Antonio Milian. And I'll also be hopping in there with some I think important information in regards to Puerto Rican history, but I also think just the history of relationships between the U.S. and our community. So we'll do all that in our Mi Gente segment. Mi Gente. All right, so it's only appropriate if we are telling Latin history that you did not know that we have somebody who goes by the name the Storytime guy. My dude, Matthew Torres, always good to see you, brother.
Good to see you too, man. It's exciting to be here. Yes, exactly. Latin Heritage Month. I'm so excited for it, man. The history of it, everything. So, yes, Barry, when you asked me to do this, I'm like, yes, absolutely, anything.
Yeah, man, right up your lane. So, I mean, put me on to this. So, we're not, just so people, listening know, I don't know any of this stuff really ahead of time. I know a little bit of what you're going to talk about, so you're going to be putting me on to something I have no idea about. So what do you got for us today? What's the piece of Latin history that people may not know that you wanted to share?
Yeah, so I want to talk about the history of Batman, of Zorro, of Joaquin Murrieta, how all of that happened, right?
Yeah.
So if for those of you that don't know, Batman, one of the best superheroes of all time, he's actually based off of Zorro, El Zorro, the Fox, famous folktale character by Johnson Macaulay. Now, Johnson Macaulay, we'll go a little into him, but he was the writer of Zorro, right? Now, Zorro and is not the best book, but it was popular enough that Walt Disney really, really enjoyed it. And so he made a TV show, and it became one of the most popular shows at the time. And I think to his death, he regarded it as his favorite live action thing he's ever done. Wow. He was like a huge Zorro stan, and he loved Zorro. So that's the kind of world that Batman was based in. And if you watch every single Batman movie that shows his origin of his parents dying, the movie that Batman saw, the last movie he saw when his parents died, was Zorro. Ooh. So only one exception to that. It's the Batman Begins is the only exception. And even on the wall, they mention Zorro. But every Batman movie, Zack Snyder's everything, when they're watching a movie, it's Zorro as a callback to Zorro being the inspiration for Batman, right? So Zorro wears all black, has a black horse, he fights people. A lot of people think he only has a sword. He has a whip and a gun that he uses fairly often. And he was the first American superhero with a secret identity. He was the penultimate original, I have a secret identity. And that's what he did. And he would fight crime and help indigenous people and mestizos and Latinos from the Spanish rule. And that was his Zorro. Other than that, though, when he was Don Diego de la Vega, that was his alternate identity. Everyone thought he was like a dandy boy. That was like a huge part of his identity. That when someone walked over, there's a scene in the Disney Plus TV show of or the Zorro Walt Disney show, where the sheriff was accusing everyone of being Zorro, and Don Diego's like, well, you haven't accused me yet. And he's like, why would I accuse you, man? He's like, because you're accusing everyone. I could be Zorro. And he's like, could you pick up that sword? Let me see. When he's holding it all uncomfortably. He's like, can you even get on a horse? And he's like, yeah. And he's tries to get on a horse, and Kenny's like, you can't be Zorro, my friend. You can't even ride a horse. You can't hold a sword. Zorro's the greatest swordsman and the greatest horseback rider. And that's part of the identity. And that really fits into how Bruce Wayne and Batman coexist with each other, Right. So, and once we know all of that, Johnson Macaulay has never outright stated, well, he's dead now, but he never outright stated where he got the idea from Zorro from. So it's all speculation. But we've gotten to a point that we are 99.9% sure where it eventually came from, right? So Johnson Macaulay himself was a terrible person. As most early 1900s writers, American writers often are. They're drunks or they're abusers, or he got off on a rape case. He was an awful person. And he was racist and sexist. So when he heard this legend of Joaquin Murrieta from his grandpa, because his grandpa grew up in California where this legend started, his grandpa told him this story, and he was like, oh, I really like that story. So he wanted to tell this character, but he didn't want it to be an indigenous person, a mestizos, right? So he changed the identity of Joaquin Murrieta, and I'll get to him in a second, to Zorro. So Zorro is ambiguously Latino. We know that his father is from Spain, but they never, ever, ever mention or bring up or talk about the mother. And so a lot of people like myself, and I've read a lot of Zorro and I'll, learn the history of it. It's he has a almost unhealthy obsession with protecting indigenous people, and there's no reason for it. There's no ever reason given. He always protects indigenous people. And with mestizos and everything at the time, with Spaniards, especially Spanish men, the assumption is that his wife or his mother was probably an indigenous woman. That his father was a Spaniard soldier, who was a very famous one, married an indigenous woman. She died. The son came out, mestizos, and carried on the legacy. So that's what we assume happened, right? So going back before that, we have Joaquin Murrieta, the original, the OG, the guy that inspired Zorro, who inspired Batman, right? Joaquin Murrieta was a simple man. We don't know much about him, but we do know that he did exist, that he was very, very famous. He was the most famous outlaw in California, one of the most famous outlaws in the entire Wild West, because this man killed a lot of white people, specifically white people. What happened was that Joaquin Murrieta, he was a regular farmer living in California, right? And during Manifest Destiny, when all the white Americans came, they're like, hey, we own this land now. They're like, oh, we already live here. You can't just claim this land that has been ours for generations. Well, one day when Joaquin Murrieta was gone, these two racist, I'm assuming racist, I don't know, but I'm assuming racist white dudes went after his wife who was at home, and they killed her. So then Joaquin comes home and they shoot him, but he lived through it. So his wife is dead. His land is gone. He almost was left for dead. So he runs to his brother for help. He gets to his brother, the city where his brother was living, and his brother is literally about to get hung by the neck. His brother got into a fight with some racist white dudes, and the sheriff, who was white, took their side. And so he unlawfully was hung by the neck and killed. So you have Joaquin Murrieta have his wife gone, his land gone, his job's gone, his brother's gone. He has nothing and no one else.
Right.
So what does he do? Turns to a life of crime. He turns into an outlaw. And he's like, I'm going to get all these racist white dudes out of my state. Yeah. This is my country. This is my homeland. They've done nothing. They're gone. And so he proceeds to go after them. He was one of the first outlaws that specifically targeted them for the race. He's like, hey, we know this land. They don't. He's mestizos, and so he is indigenous, and he knows the land enough that he's able to use it to his advantage to pull crimes. And it wasn't just him running in and shooting a bunch of people.
Sure.
He was actually smart in that he would pretend and put on fake accents, and because he's mestizos and he was passing enough that he could pretend to be white. And he would go and hang out with like the KKK and the the racist white people, and they would never know. And he would also put on fake accents of being indigenous. So no one knew where he was or how to find him.
Yeah.
And he eventually got so popular that he started a crime ring called, like, I think it was the 4 or 5 Joaquins, because they were all named Joaquin, or in the very least, they chose to all be named Joaquin.
Right.
So he had a bunch of people, and that eventually spread to they had a whole gang of people who were like, yeah, let's take back our land. Eventually, he got so popular that they're like, hey, anyone finds him, you need to kill him because he's getting out of control.
Yeah.
Because he was never being caught. And there's not much information on him and why he did what he did other than that he wanted them out. Yeah. But there's some instances where he found Asian people and chose to not go after them. Where he saw the Asians and the Chinese in California. He's like, hey, this is not our battle. This is it was implied that he didn't necessarily, because he also viewed them as here, but he viewed them less as antagonistic than he did. So in those instances, he really didn't do anything. The same with African Americans. Like, look, you guys didn't, this is not our fight. I'm not going to go after you, but don't bother me, kind of thing. And eventually, what happened to Joaquin is that someone supposedly found him. They cornered him and cut off his head.
Ooh.
Now, and so they carried around a jar with his head, and it got lost, and they found it, and there's a Joaquin's head in the jar. The problem is that if you go back to the original incident as it was reported, the person who did it said, I found a guy who was an outlaw named Joaquin, so I killed him. No one knows if that's actually Joaquin Murrieta.
Right.
It was a guy named Joaquin, which to me, I have to remind people, if you don't know like Latino names, that's like going into like Texas and being like, I'm looking for a guy named Juan.
Yeah.
Okay. Good luck. I don't know.
Yeah, you'll find somebody.
You'll find a guy named Juan.
Yeah.
Is it the one you're looking for? Probably not. But it's so. And then after he was declared dead and they got the bounty, we never saw him again. He could be like, well, yeah, we never saw him because I killed him. Or equally likely, he bounced. I mean, he was like, hey, I did what I have to do. People think I'm dead. They don't know what I look like.
Right.
So he dipped out. And so that's the whole. So Johnson McCulley, who created Zorro, read all of that story. And he's like, God, I love this. Like this outlaw in California. He wants to have it take place in Los Angeles and really like build up this California mythos Wild West. Because really at the time, that wasn't something that anyone was doing.
Yeah.
Which is why it really grew in California and Los Angeles, because Zorro is from Los Angeles. He's not like, a made up place. Like he is a Los Angeles superhero.
Right.
And an old school one too. So to me, it's like, we have all these things, and he created this. He changed a few things around because he was like, well, I don't want this guy like murdering white people. I'm not going to write about that.
Right.
Because he himself was kind of racist.
Right.
But he's like, but I'll take this idea of this outlaw who has these multiple identities and multiple things and really just goes for it. So I just want to share that with you guys, because to me, I'm like, that is the coolest thing of having this Latino outlaw that, I mean, he didn't know he would be the inspiration indirectly for one of the coolest superheroes ever. He was just being smart about things. He was being an outlaw. His gun skill was never brought up. Like he shot a few people, whatever, it's like, because you often hear cowboys, oh, he could shoot this. Joaquin was never about that. Right. It was about tricking people, about outsmarting people, about constantly putting them in, robbing people. Because he would never rob people at gunpoint. He would trick them. He'd be like, oh, I'm here to get this. And he would put on dozens of fake accents, so much to the point no one knew who he was.
Right.
Because they didn't know if it was someone else pretending to be him, if it was actually him. Yeah. He would hire people, regular farmers, and be like, hey, go say your name is Joaquin Murrieta. Yeah. And go like, do this. And they would do it, and he'd pay them, and then they're like, oh, Joaquin's an 80-year-old man. And they're like, is he? So to me, it's like, that's what I love about our American folktale history, is that American history, especially Latin American history, it's often seen as outside of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
We never get Latin American history in the United States. And often when it comes to these big things, like we have cowboys, everybody loves cowboys and Annie Oakley and, Billy the Kid and, Buffalo Bill, all these things, but we never really see cowboys outside of like white people because narratives, a lot of these people told their own stories. So for me, it's to hear this, to see Joaquin Murrieta's, to go like, hey, we were here. We've been here. This is the story of our people. And Latinos were cowboys. We're the original cowboys. We're the vaqueros, the caballeros, Right. So to me, it's this really interesting story of our history. And at the same time, it's like, it reminds you that just because our stories aren't always told doesn't mean we're not there.
Right.
Like Pirates of the Caribbean. Where's Pirates of the Caribbean taking place? In the Caribbean, right?
Right.
How many Latino pirates do you see in those movies? How many pirates Latino pirates do you hear about? You go, this doesn't make it. How can there be a whole area of Caribbean along Florida, along the Caribbean and Puerto Rico and Cuba, and there's no Latinos? There's almost, they're like,
right. No, it is interesting. It's because we often think California's history starts like, or Texas even starts when it becomes a part of the United States, but we forget there's a whole like that was its own thing. There were people living there prior to all of this, right? And there's so many different stories that are left untold. And even I had no idea that Zorro was the inspiration for Batman. That's new information to me. So let me ask you, I haven't seen my only sort of relationship with Zorro is the movie with Antonio Banderas, which I saw when I was a kid when it first came out. And there's a cartoon version of it, right, that preceded it?
Yeah.
So this whole thing is like somewhat dark for like a cartoon kind of, right? So what is the cartoon version of it like?
The cartoon version, I couldn't tell you much about that, but I can tell you about the history of Zorro in film.
Yeah.
Because he's public domain, he has been adapted several times. He has been, there have been, there's like over 30 or 40 films and shows about Zorro. But in every single instance, he's been played by a white guy.
Right.
And so it's one of those weird things. And currently, the way it happened is Johnson McCauley gave his publisher the rights. Well, even after the rights dissipated because of copyright and public domain laws, the authorship of the copyright would sue people who try to do Zorro. Because he's like, oh, no, I have Zorro Productions, so therefore I own Zorro. And they're like, well, he's public domain. They're like, oh, but only the first book is public domain. You have to wait 3 years for the other book. And if you use something outside of that first book, that breaks copyright. So I'm going to sue you. So he himself is the guy who's in charge of the Zorro copyrights is a terrible, terrible scumbag person. And he's still working. He's produced all the Zorro films. He pretty much goes up to you and goes, I'll sue you or you make me a producer on your film.
Right.
He worked on the Antonio Banderas one. He's working on the new one with Wilmar Valderramas, which I don't know if that'll ever get made.
Yeah.
But they're currently, with Wilmar Valderramas, they're trying to do a modern Zorro. And we'll see about that. But yeah, so me, it's like, it's really interesting that our history, our character of this, of our own folktale character is still to this day being held in a tight grip. It's like,
yeah.
Joaquin Murrieta lost his farm and his legacy is still big.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. I mean, even James Bond is like based off of a Dominican man. You know what I mean? If I'm not mistaken, from Chris Rivas, when I had him on the show, was telling me about it, and I had no idea about that. Right, so it is like this whitewashing of our history that happens, and nobody kind of speaks about it. So this is fascinating to know that something as big as Batman is based off of a real Latin figure that was then adapted into, the idea of Zorro and then adapted into Batman. So man, you put me onto some game today, bro.
Thank you. Yeah, and like I said, every movie always pays reference, tribute to this thing. The comic books do as well. If you watch the Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy show, like I said, Zack Snyder's, the Tim Burton, every single movie pays homage to Zorro. That is the movie. That's why even in universe, Bruce Wayne has stated one of his favorite movies is the original 1920-something or 1930s character of Zorro, because that's who he looks up to in real life. So for all the people that love Batman and you're Latino and you want a little bit of it, just remind yourself that Bruce Wayne, one of the people that he looks up to is Zorro. So I think that's pretty cool.
No, that gives me some Easter eggs to now go back and rewatch some of those movies and see it from a different lens. But I appreciate it, dude. Well, listen, bro, I appreciate you contributing to the episode and sharing that story. You put me onto something I didn't know. Where can people follow you? You do all kinds of deep dives into Latin history and folklore and things like that. So if they want to check out more, where can they follow you?
Yeah, I'm at the Storytime Guy. One word, the Storytime Guy. You can find me on Instagram, TikTok. I do a few things on YouTube, do a little longer deep dives, especially into Aztec mythology. So yeah, if you like Aztec mythology, Latin American folktales, I do folktales from around the world too. I especially like focusing on African American folktales as well. You know, folktales that just aren't told. I don't know how many reboots and remakes of Cinderella and so on. We don't have to turn those characters. We got our own stories to tell. We got amazing stories to tell. We just got to tell them. So if you like that kind of stuff, you like horror, I'm the guy for you. You're going to have a great time.
Beautiful, my bro. Well, listen, always good catching up with you. I'm sure I'll see you soon for a regular episode, but it was good to have you on here as we kick off Latin Heritage Month, sharing some Latin history that people didn't know.
Thank you, Primo. You have a nice day.
Man, big shout out to my guy, Matthew Torres, a.k.a. the Storytime Guy, for hopping on and giving us that information that I had no idea about. I think that's a fun piece of information. It's like some good cocktail knowledge to have. Is that what they call it? Or cocktail I don't know. You're sitting at the dinner table, and this is a fun little fact you can bring up to your family or to your kids, right? When they're watching Batman, let them know the inspiration was actually a Latino. I think that's a beautiful thing. Now, moving on to something a little more serious. This one is like political history and I think just cultural history that's a bit dark. I want to talk about Pedro Albizu Campos, right? And I would sort of describe him as like the Puerto Rican Malcolm X almost, right? He was that for us. He was a part of the independence movement for Puerto Rico, known by many as El Maestro. He was one of the most prominent Puerto Rican political figures of the 20th century, a national hero who sacrificed his life for the freedom of his country. And this is bits and pieces from an article that I pulled on the ALUC website. And they had a really cool kind of comprehensive sort of timeline of his life. I also put a few different things that they had mentioned. I built off it a little bit. But Albizu graduated from Harvard Law in 1921 while simultaneously studying literature, philosophy, chemical engineering, and military science at Harvard College. He was fluent in 6 modern and 2 classical languages: English, Spanish, French, German, Portuguese, Italian, Latin, and ancient Greek. So, you know, very smart kind of guy. And we're going to kind of get into a bit of what he did and some of the fight that he sort of had where he was fighting for the independence of Puerto Rico and also exposing some atrocities that were happening. But I do want to talk about real quick some of his accolades as we're kind of mentioning here, because at the time that he was going to Harvard Law, there was a lot of racism happening. And Albizu Campos, by many sort of conversations or by many accounts, I should say, was an Afro-Latino, right? So not only is he Puerto Rican, but he's also a darker skinned man, a black man at the end of the day, right? And he is somebody who obviously is defying the odds going to something as prestigious as Harvard Law, particularly in the time that he was there. I mean, upon his graduation from law school, he was recruited for several prestigious positions, including law clerkship to the U.S. Supreme Court, a diplomatic post with the U.S. State Department, the regional vice presidency, Caribbean region of the U.S. Agricultural Syndicate, and a tenured faculty appointment to the University of Puerto Rico, right? A lot of options he had, and his main thing was to fight for the people of Puerto Rico. But what I want to sort of paint a timeline is we're in the 1920s here, right? So June 23rd, 1921, he graduates from Harvard Law, but without his law diploma, right? So he had been the victim of racial discrimination by one of his professors, and the professor actually delayed Albizu Campos' third-year final exams for his courses in evidence and corporations. Albizu was about to graduate with the highest grade point average in his entire law school class. Highest grade point average in his entire law school class. As such, he was scheduled to give the valedictory speech during the graduation ceremonies. His professor actually delayed his exam so he could not complete his work and avoided the, quote, embarrassment of a Puerto Rican law valedictorian. So that shows you the time period and the things that this man was working against and pushing back against, right? Now, when it comes to his actual, work with Puerto Rico and what he was fighting for, he was instrumental in winning an island-wide sugarcane strike and actually was part of the reason that a just atrocity was exposed, right? There was a secret medical experiment happening that was actually sponsored by the Rockefeller Institute, and they were experimenting on Puerto Ricans, and Albizu Campos was one of the people who helped expose this, right? So this story, which is really dark and just sort of kind of shows you where we were and a lot of the dark history between America, the United States, and the powers that be in general, and a lot of the racism that happens towards Puerto Ricans and has sort of been buried in the laws. In 1930s, you had Dr. Cornelius Rhodes going to Puerto Rico to, quote, working in public health to alleviate disease. And this is quotes from author Daniel Immerwahr, who wrote a book about this. But he says he immediately started running all kinds of experiments that it's almost impossible to imagine him doing on the mainland, certainly not on white patients. He refused to treat some of his patients just to see what would happen with them. In other patients, he actually tried to induce disease in them. He described them to his colleagues as experimental animals. So he's talking about Puerto Rican people, this white doctor, and describing them as experimental animals, right? Now, Rhodes went on to write a letter to a colleague in Boston saying that while the place is, quote, beautiful, Puerto Ricans are, quote, beyond doubt the dirtiest, laziest, most degenerate and thievish race of men ever inhabiting this sphere. It makes you sick to inhabit the same island with them. Now, ironically, he went on to serve as the director of Memorial Hospital for Cancer Research in New York and as the first director of Sloan Kettering Institute, becoming the director of the combined Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, which is still around to this day. For his contributions to cancer research, Rhodes was actually featured on the cover of the June 27th, 1949 issue of Time magazine under the title Cancer Fighter, right? And this is somebody who was running experiments on other human beings as if they were lab animals just because they were brown, essentially, right? And just truly just disgusting stuff when you think about it, right? And the things that are said and that were eventually exposed in this letter, and Albizu Campos helped expose this stuff, man. It's just like, it shows you the ideology that exists when a lot of the laws that affect Puerto Ricans till this day were put in place, right? So during this time period when you had the laws that are still abided by, essentially, that leave Puerto Rico as a colony, and the rights that the citizens of Puerto Rico do and don't have, you know, a lot of these laws were created by people who shared in the same mindset as this person, Dr. Cornelius Rhodes, who went on to be celebrated as a hero, even with this sort of dark history. Now, moving back to Albizu Campos, he developed the theory of non-collaboration with the colonial structures, right? So he talks about boycotting elections and military service. He soon became a target of the colonial forces, talking about America here, was arrested and charged with seditious conspiracy. From the mid-30s to the early 60s, Pedro Albizu Campos would be in and out of U.S. prisons for 25 years. During his incarceration, he repeatedly charged that he was a target of human radiation experiments. His skin severely swollen and cracking. He covered himself with wet towels. Jailers thought he was crazy, but today there is proof that radiation experiments did take place. And to back that up, I pulled a tidbit from 1994. Under the administration of ex-President Bill Clinton, the United States Department of Energy disclosed that human radiation experiments had been conducted without consent on prisoners in Puerto Rico during the 1950s and 70s, right? So again, there is a history here of the powers that be viewing Puerto Ricans as less than human. And those are the same people who have been in charge of the fate of this island and its citizens, since it became a colony of the United States. It's kind of dark, right? Kind of disgusting. And it's sad that these are the things that are not spoken about enough. And when I have critiques of the United States and am outspoken about things, it's with the knowledge that the U.S. has committed so many different atrocities. It's not a perfect place. The powers that be are by no means perfect. They've supported racist practices and disgusting and inhumane, practices at the end of the day. And we need to hold them accountable. And if we don't, who's to stop them from doing things like this in the future, right? That's why it's incredible to me when people claim it's anti-patriotic to critique the government, when they've proven time and time again they're not perfect. They don't always have the people's best interest in mind. And if we aren't holding them accountable or trying to, it really just opens the door for far more atrocities to happen. Now back to Albizu Campos, his fight for Puerto Rican independence, quote, "The good people of the U.S. are not to be blamed for the shameless conduct of certain government officials." He argued this in court and at the podium that the U.S. occupation of Puerto Rico was illegal. His legal argument was based on the question of the U.S. being awarded proprietary rights over Puerto Rico by virtue of the Paris Peace Treaty of 1898. The island was handed over by Spain along with Cuba and the Philippines as spoils of the war to the U.S. He claimed that the treaty was nullified by the fact that Spain had previously granted autonomy to Puerto Rico in 1897. By the time of the treaty, Puerto Rico had its own coin, its own postage stamps, mail, and customs service, and was therefore a sovereign, independent nation under international law. Spain, he claimed, had no right to give away another sovereign nation. Furthermore, Puerto Rico per se had never participated at the treaty nor even been consulted. His summation was to the effect that this country's consent to its association to the U.S. never having been asked nor conceded, the acquisition effected by the U.S. under said treaty is a violation of international law. Now, he never accepted the United States' rights to govern Puerto Rico. He did reach that, quote, "If they won't listen to legal reason, we must take up arms against the invaders," end quote. Now, another interesting piece of information is both Cuba and the Philippines, where the Spanish-American War was fought, were granted their independence. Only Puerto Rico, where there was no major fighting, is still controlled by the United States till this day, of course. In 1956, Albizu Campos suffered a stroke in prison and was transferred to San Juan's Presbyterian Hospital under police guard. On November 15th, 1964, on the brink of death, Pedro Albizu Campos was pardoned by Governor Luis Muñoz Marin. He died April 21st, 1965. More than 75,000 Puerto Ricans were part of a procession that accompanied his body for the burial in Old San Juan Cemetery. So I just wanted to bring this story, and obviously if you're Puerto Rican, this hits really close to home. If you're not, I think that you can relate in a bit of the struggles, and I think you can share in probably some of the anger and the validation of knowing that this country has done a lot of evil things to people of color. And much of it is underreported, not reported at all, right? Like, I didn't learn about Pedro Albizu Campos until fairly recently, I feel like. Later in my life, this wasn't something that was spoken about. We don't talk about this shit in textbooks, and the only reason that his memory, his story, and these atrocities are spoken about is people like myself and people that I've read from who are refusing to allow our history to die. And that's why it's important to share things like this and for us to be aware of it, and to also have that information that when people wonder why we have a certain mistrust of our government or this country as people of color, specifically as Latinos, we can point to stories like this one that prove that this place was never designed for people like us, right? We were viewed as lesser than, and they've done countless things to continue to not only make us feel that way, but to put into practice ways that they can legally treat us that way as lesser than and not human. And when you see the letters, like from someone from Dr. Cornelius Rhodes, writing so freely, things like this, and somebody that then gets celebrated as a hero in medicine, it just kind of shows you that, man, these powerful people of those time periods, when a lot of these laws and ideas were being put into place, like what they really thought of people who look like you and I, and it wasn't something positive. And someone like Pedro Albizu Campos, though he wasn't successful in his fight for independence for Puerto Rico, he gave his life for this. He was somebody who, made it his life's mission, his life's work, and I think that's something to be celebrated at the end of the day. Not a lot of people would literally give their life for any particular cause, let alone the cause of an entire sort of nation of people. And I just think it's needs to be celebrated and talked about. Again, like, he's our Malcolm X, essentially, right? And his story needs to be kept alive because what it means for Puerto Ricans, but I think Latinos as a whole in our constant fight for equality and what's right, I think, at the end of the day. Now, I know it's a bit heavy, so we're going to close things out on a bit of a lighter note with my guy Antonio Milian. We'll talk about some aliens.
So one of my favorite creators that is just, I think, a compelling storyteller and always puts me onto history that I'm not even keen, to when it comes to our culture is my guy Antonio Milian. So first and foremost, my dude, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, man. Thank you for having me as always. It's always a pleasure coming on here to be a guest.
Of course. Yeah, we're in the midst of, we're kicking off. This is my first episode for Latin History Month, Latinx History Month, Latino History Month, however, anybody wants to identify it as. And I thought the best way to do it was to have some of you guys who really are, helping tell our stories to come on and tell some Latin history that people may not know. So I'm going to kind of turn the reins over to you. I want to know what you kind of, picked for us for today to kind of put people onto some history they may not be keen to.
Absolutely. So you've heard of War of the Worlds, right? Like back in the 1930s, H.G. Wells, he came up with this concept called War of the Worlds, and it spooked a lot of people. He went on the radio, and he was basically like alluding to the fact that aliens were invading New Jersey. They were on their way to New York, and it instilled mass panic. You're familiar with that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. People weren't sure. They thought it was like a real newscast, even though it was like supposed to just be like an entertainment show.
Absolutely. So people thought, like you said, they thought it was a real newscast, but it was really just an entertainment radio program. But
yeah,
so people don't talk about how often that happened after, specifically in Latin America, specifically in South America. So in Chile, they did one where it instilled mass panic to the point where somebody had a heart attack and died.
Wow.
So that's something that like no one talks about. But the biggest one was in Ecuador. So the guy who started it, he worked for Radio Quito in the capital of Ecuador, and he got the idea for this War of the Worlds type of thing to put it in Ecuadorian context. In 1944, he made a drama, and basically he included real people. So he included a very well-known orchestra person. So in the beginning, he played the orchestra music, and then he cut the orchestra music off, and he started talking like he was a news broadcaster, basically saying that, like, hey, there are these green men that are in this small town in Ecuador. They are, they're coming. We don't know what to do. People started freaking out, so much so that it got to the president's office in Ecuador. And he dispatched the military to this small town.
Wow.
The guy who did this, his name was Jorge Rabanera, and he was 19 at the time. So think about like where we were when we were 19, and like all the crazy shit we were doing when we were 19.
Sure.
So, and he took place on a Saturday night. He worked for Radio Quito, basically the local radio station. It was a Saturday night where people would be home and where they would be normally listening to music. And he played the music for long enough so that people would get comfortable, and they would be like, oh, this is really, peaceful music, whatever. And then he cut it. And then he was like, hey, there are these green aliens and they're coming towards the capital. He even stated that there was a cylindrical object that had crashed in this small little town that these aliens were coming from. He even said that the well-known musician, Leonardo Paez, that he included was fried by green bolt from one of these aliens. So it wasn't really like, if let's say, for example, like, I got on the radio, you got on the radio, and you were like, yo, an alien just crashed in Atlanta and it killed Jeezy. People would be like, yo, that's wild. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's the equivalent. It's equivalent to that. The guy, as of 2014, the guy, Jorge Rabanera, he was still alive in 2014. I wasn't able to find anything about him recently. I don't know. He was 83 years old. And basically, like, he was like, his family started calling him, asking if he was okay. And he was like, oh, no, it's just a joke. But the word had gotten out so far that it became more than just a joke. There were people running around in the streets. There were police heading towards this small town, Cotocalo, police, military. It instilled mass panic. Even his mother came to get him from the radio station. So yeah, this is like a history fact that like not a lot of people know about, especially when it comes to like the recent news that there might be aliens are out there, or
Right.
there are aliens out there. And Mexico recently just released some imagery of what we believe to be our aliens. So I thought that was a cool tie-in to like what's going on now.
Yeah, it's funny. In Latin America in general, you have always had a lot of UFO sightings, right? And reported UFO sightings, and even back to the times of like the Mayans or the Aztecs, there's a lot of UFO stories about, possibly aliens helping them build these pyramids and all these things, right? So it's very much tied into
Right.
Our culture. And then, you have the dude in Mexico City presenting in front of Congress recently, in front of Mexican Congress, with these alleged alien corpses. But actually, what came to my mind beyond like the literal alien stuff is this is kind of also our modern media to a degree, right? When it comes to politics and the way that it's kind of, they're just using the same tactics, but they're not filling you in on the fact that it's a joke at any point, right? And something like January 6th is not to make it political, but it's something like January 6th is something very similar, except people ended up going to fucking jail over the lie that was being told that they believed, essentially.
And even like with the whole alien thing, with the guy presenting before our Congress in the U.S., it's like, how much of this is real and how much is it that the military saying, hey, we want more money to make more advanced shit? You know what I mean?
Right. That's actually a great. I never even thought of that being like the vantage point as to why now there's like far more open dialogue or things being declassified or people coming out and speaking of it. That's a great vantage point. Yeah, maybe they really just want some more money to make some crazier technology rockets and things like that.
Right.
Yeah.
But eventually, what happened to this guy? From my understanding, he ended up fleeing the radio broadcaster. He ended up fleeing to Mexico. He lived in Mexico for a while.
Yeah.
I think they were talking about like pressing charges against him for instilling mass panic. And he eventually moved back to Quito, back to Ecuador, and I think he lived there. If he is still alive, he was 83 in 2014. So, he would be he would be like 92 now. But, I couldn't find anything about whether or not he was still alive. But I just thought it was a crazy story. It went a lot deeper than what happened here in the United States. And it's not something that's ever talked about.
Right. No, that's a funny little like kind of fact. Is the dude who did War of the Worlds, was he brought up on charges or no? Because it wasn't like spontaneous.
No, I don't think he was, because I think the whole idea was for his show was that like, hey, like this is a program. This isn't a news show. This is a program.
Right.
So people just kind of were like, oh, this is different. So they freaked out.
Yeah. I mean, there's like a genius to this. I think, like as a creative, it gets my brain thinking a little bit. But it's also like so much of the modern era that we live in with TikTok and all these different things where people are creating these fake things for the sake of capturing reactions.
Right.
And it's interesting that it goes all the way back to what the 40s you're talking about, right? This sort of thing. Man, yes, so that's
1944.
Man, and a different world, especially you think about it in today's day and age, we have like everything is so visual, but back then, their television was the radio, right? You would listen to like a show and that would be your entertainment essentially. So you don't even have like the ability to pick apart the visual component of it. You're just listening to it, and your ears can be deceived by how authentic it ends up sounding, right? There's less of like a barrier to entry when it comes to making it feel real.
Right. It's similar to like you said, the news. Like, you see the news for what it is and you don't really question it.
Yeah.
So we kind of have the same thing going on now visually that they had going on auditory back then. Like they didn't question it. They were like, oh shit, there's aliens in New Jersey.
Right.
It's New Jersey. Like, why would aliens come to New Jersey? Anyway.
Hey, we're not going to be New Jersey slander on the show, okay? But my dude, I always appreciate you, man, for hopping on here and being one of the creators we're having on the show today. I know you're always telling little stories like this one that you're researching on everything all Latin culture. So where can people follow you and keep up with some of the other stuff you're doing?
Yeah, so TikTok, Instagram, Def Not Ant. I'm on Facebook now, so Def Not Ant. LinkedIn, Antonio Milian. So yeah, you can follow me wherever. I post content on all those platforms.
Perfect. Well, my dude, always good seeing you, brother, and we'll have you back on soon.
Awesome, man. Take care of yourself. Bye.
Man, so big shout out to my guests today, the Storytime guy, Matthew Torres, and my guy, Antonio Milian, for sharing some stories that they found super interesting, Latin history you may not have known. Man, I'm excited to kind of bring this episode to life. I was stewing on it. How do we kick off, Latin Heritage Month? And I thought the best way possible would just be throwing some facts about our community that maybe you didn't know. So with that said, let's tie everything we talked about today in a neat little bow in a segment called Conclusion Stew.
Time for Conclusion Stew.
I think for me, some of the bigger takeaways of today's show in Latin history didn't know. For starters, when we talk about the world of entertainment, and I'm reading that list of people that you might not have known are Latino, come from Latin descent. Some were obvious, some not so much. I think it tells the narrative of the fact that like people had to hide their Latinness in order to find success, right? And while that's obviously changing because it's cool to be Latin now, I think it's I don't know, man. It obviously rubs me the wrong way, but I think it's why our history has been so buried for so long, and why it's so important for us to have ownership over who we are and where we come from and be unapologetic about it, right? Because we can't go back into hiding. We have to celebrate our culture and where we come from, and make people respect us as people, and not have to worry that if we showcase who we truly are, they're going to not give us the opportunities that we deserve, right? And I think that's what you probably saw a lot in the world of entertainment. And then I think even when it comes to our history, right? We're talking about Latin history you didn't know. Matthew Torres, a Storytime guy. Maybe there's a lot of people who are familiar with this in the world of comic books, but it's the idea that like Batman, one of the biggest superheroes known to man, his origins come from a Latin sort of folklore, right? And I think there's something beautiful about that. I think it also shows you the whitewashing of Hollywood in general, and entertainment in general, where they made it a white man, and that was the sort of narrative behind it. But I think those are things to be celebrated, right? So like I said this, when we were talking about that story and I was wrapping it up, like that's something like for me when I have a kid one day and we're watching something Batman related, I think it's gonna be dope to be like, hey, did you know the origin, the inspiration for Batman was actually a Latino? And I just think little things like that are going to help bring confidence to that next generation, and to I think us as people, where we can stand proudly in knowing that like our history is long ingrained in the history of this country and this world. No matter how much people try to erase it, we've been making contributions and continue to make contributions, and there's no reason for us to be hiding in the shadows anymore. And then when it comes to Pedro Albizu Campos, I think it's important to just be aware of the dark history of this country and how we have been viewed by the powers that be, and why there is so much angst and tension, because historically we've been mistreated under the watch of this government or under the direct orders of this government. And I think, it's important to know your history. It's important to make sure that figures like Pedro Albizu Campos are not forgotten about because of the fight that they were putting out there, for brown people, for Latinos as a whole, for marginalized people as a whole, fighting against the big machine that was the United States, or is the United States in general. And I think, these are parts of our history that aren't spoken about enough, and will be forgotten, will be erased if we don't continue having these conversations. And I also just love having a little bit of fun with Antonio about the alien stuff we've been talking about recently, and just sharing a fun bit of, I guess, pop culture that I've never heard of before. We heard about War of the Worlds, but hearing that inspired a whole other thing that got a bit out of control, I think is a fun little story to kind of close out with. So that's it, man. Happy Latin Heritage Month as we kick off. I'm going to try to, inject a few different special things for this month as we go on the next few weeks. And Just Be, our Just Be social club. We just opened up the offer, justbe.nyc. Okay, go to the social club tab and you can apply. We only have 4 spots. It's one-on-one coaching in addition to the group meetups that we do with the other rotating members that we have, the mastermind group. Really, really dope. It's all on the 4 pillars of conscious living that we've been talking about over the course of the last month. You can apply and then schedule a free one-on-one consultation with myself and my business partner, Brenda, and we'll figure out if you're a good fit for it. We would love to have you, love to potentially help you change your life and get closer and closer to fulfillment and be moving in the direction that you're hoping for. So listen, the consultation is free to talk to us, see if it's a good fit. I don't want you to be holding back. Don't let fear hold you back from living the life that you're meant to live, right? From holding you back from being truly happy and fulfilled. If you're on the fence right now, that means that something is speaking to you and saying that you want something more out of your life. And at the end of the day, that life you're dreaming about is on the other side of that fear. So we make it very easy. Go to the website, justbe.nyc, social club tab, literally click apply now. It's a couple questions and you'll schedule a one-on-one with us and we'll have a talk and see if it's a good fit for you, see what you're trying to do. And we would love to have you be a part of this movement that we're building. You'll be a lifelong member for the group mentorship and the group mastermind groups and all that stuff. So, man, hit me up. Any other questions at DJ Dramos? Feel free to slide into the DMs. And that's it. I will catch you on Thursday for our Thursday Trends episode. Until then, stay safe and we'll talk soon. Peace.